everyone, Charlotta here, and this is the School of Pattern Cutting, where I help you draft your perfect wardrobe. Last week I talked about why I started drafting shawl collars 7 years ago here on YouTube, so I thought it was only fair to show you actually how to draft a shawl collar. Again, this is the new and improved version just for you. I hope you enjoyed. I just finished the actual drafting tutorial. You can see I've got some new blocks to celebrate 7 years of drafting tutorials. Hooray! Slightly sad. I tried to make the pattern pieces really clear, and you can see there's a bin full of all first 1.5 tries. So this is the second attempt, and even with something like that I can do by heart. I still get something wrong. Which is part of the beauty of pattern cutting. You do it wrong in paper, not in fabric. But yes, these are my pattern pieces. So I just now need to edit it all together for you. And then I hope you like my new and improved shawl collar tutorial. Let's draft this shawl collar. You will need the front and the back of your bodice. This could be your block, or could be an actual garment you want to add the collar to. If you work on a garment, just make sure to take off the seam allowance on your shoulder, neckline, and down your center front. You also need a big piece of paper with at least sort of 15 to 20 centimeters, or about 8 inches above. And you need a ruler or pattern master with a 90-degree angle and parallel lines if possible, and a curve won't hurt. You also need a very sharp pencil. I'm using Sharpies just to make it clearer for you to see, but in real life use a pencil. And you also need scissors to cut the pattern out later. The first thing you do is you trace around your front bodice. And I've marked all my darts, but of course it depends on your style. The first thing we need to do is mark our button stand. So that is up to taste. You don't even need one. You could just have a seam. But I'm doing a 2.5 centimeter button stand, which is 1 inch. And I'm laying my 2.5 centimeters line on the center front, and I'm drawing a parallel line. At the bottom, I'm squaring this line back into the bodice. So I've now created my button stand. The next thing I need to do is mark my break point, which is the point where the button stand folds and becomes the shawl collar. You can do it however high you want to. I'm doing mine roughly with a bust point, but that's completely up to your own design. Next, we're going to draw in our break line, which is the fold line of your collar. It starts at your break point and it goes through your high shoulder point. Connect these two and extend this line past and up above. Now we need to draw in our back neck of our collar height, and the collar outline. To draw your back neck, you can either measure back neckline, and then you can mark it on there and curve it back. But I'm going to show you a trick to make it a bit faster. As we already have the line on our back block, I'm just going to copy it. So first thing I need to do is flip my back bodice over so my high shoulder points are touching and the center back of my back bodice is on my extension line. And now I can just move it around until I get the fit I want. And I'm going to give you a few tips on what fit you can get. The higher up you use it, so if you draw your back neck, is it just touching your extension line, you're going to get a very, very close fitting collar. For a sort of average shawl collar, I would probably move 1 to 2 centimeters down towards my shoulder, which will give you a sort of easy fitting shawl collar. If you want a very flat shawl collar, which might even become a sailor collar, you can move it a lot further down. I'm going to do a easy fitting shawl collar. So I'm moving roughly 1 to 2 centimeters. It's up to your taste towards the shoulder, but I've got my shoulder points touching. And then I'm going to draw in my line. I'm then going to draw down my center back. So mark the edge of your bodice, and that's going to give you your center back on your collar. Can you see this is quite a strong curve? If you have an even bigger neck, you could actually recurve it slightly. And as long as it's just a few mils, it will actually give you just the sort of fitting, it'll be fine. But the line should be the same length, but it's just slightly less curved. But in theory, the original line should be fine. It's just sometimes you want to make it less bit smoother. Next thing you need to do is draw the height of your collar at the back. And of course the collar will be folded in the end. So we need to draw in double the height. So I'm going to make mine 2.5 centimeters when it's folded, which means my oval height is 5 centimeters. So you always double it. So if it's 1 inch high, you're going to mark 2 inches, which is your oval height unfolded. Next, we're going to draw in the outer line of our collar. And we're going to start at 90 degrees again. So it starts out parallel on the center back. So you got 90-degree line here and a 90-degree line there. And that's just going to give you a very nice smooth line on your center back. Because if you have an angle or curve, your center back would kick out or kick down or curve. So always make sure 90 degrees here and 90 degrees there. Now all you need to do is draw in the design of your shawl collar, and that is completely up to you as a designer. I'm making my shawl collar quite subtle, so I'm starting with quite a subtle curve. And then you might want to sort of move you can either use the curve for your pattern master, or you might sort of move around, draw how you want it. And what you might want to do is draw it freehand first to see how you want it to look. So this is my shawl collar finished for its first trowel. And for your first trowel or sloper, just cut this out, cut it out in fabric without any seam allowance, and just put it on yourself and see how you like the fit around here. And then you might want to have some lines and cut them into there if it's too big or too tight, and you can change the fit by adding or subtracting volume there. Once you're happy with your first trowel, you can even make a second trowel just to make sure, and once you've done that, you can cut out your full pattern. To do that, you need to add seam allowance all around. So however wide you do it, you just draw your parallel lines everywhere, even your center back, because that's a seam as well. Once you've done that, you can also add your facing. I'm going to quickly show you how to construct your facing. First of all, you need to add your facing line. And I'm making mine 5 centimeters away from my high shoulder point, which is about 2 inches. And I'm starting out at a 90-degree angle again to my shoulder, and I draw it down. And then I'm also doing it 5 centimeters wide at the bottom, which is 2 inches, but of course that's up to your own taste. You can make it a bit wider or a bit narrower. If you have a seam, you could even have it shaped. I'm just drawing my facing line on. When you put a piece of paper on top and you just trace around this part, you also create a facing the same width as this, which goes around there. And you also, of course, need to cut out your back bodice. Once you've done that, I'm going to show you how to actually put your bodice with a shawl collar together. So these are your pattern pieces, this seam allowance. As you can see, I've also created a facing for the back neck. I made it as a triangle, but you can also do it as a half-moon shape. It's up to you. And this distance is the same as this distance, so it matches. This is my front facing. As you can see, I haven't cut it out yet because I quickly wanted to talk to you about adding a tiny bit of excess to your outer collar edge to ensure a better fit. And that's really important if you're working in a thicker wool or something, because you don't want your seam showing at the edge of your collar. So by making your facing a tiny bit bigger, it rolls around and the hem is sort of hidden underneath and you get a nicer edge. If you look at any well-made jacket, you notice they use a similar technique. So I always make them facing, in this case, over top collar, a tiny bit bigger. And I'm using a Sharpie, so it's more or less impossible. But you want to make it a maximum of 2 mil bigger. 1 to 2 mils a maximum, which is 20 above an inch, I think. And you only want to add a bit of excess from your center back. And on your pattern master, and a lot of pattern rulers, you actually have the line which is the right width, so you can make it a tiny bit bigger. If in doubt, make it less rather than too much, because if you add too much, it's gonna become impossible to stitch. So I'm exaggerating here, but you want to start from nothing at your break point, and when you literally just have it parallel 2 mil maximum wider, and that will just give you a nicer edge. And then you can cut it on that outer edge before you put it together. The last thing we need to do before you can cut it out in fabric is just mark our straight of grain and our pattern pieces. So our straight of grain is normally the center front and the center back, so that's quite straightforward. You want to cut one of your back on fold. With your front, you want to cut 2 or 1 pair. So I always say 1 pair because I want a left and a right. I don't want 2 left, 2 rights. And the same, this you're facing, is you cut 1 pair. And with your center back facing, you only cut 1. because with small pieces like that, I don't like cutting and fold, which is why I've traced around the whole thing in paper so I can cut it out simply. Next thing you just cut out all your pieces in fabric, and I'm just going to give you a few tips on how to put it together. So let's put the facing to the side for now. The first seam I like to do are my shoulder seams. So what you do is, what's really important is your high shoulder point on both your front and your back. They need to match perfectly. So I actually put a pin. You could mark it in chalk and you put a pin in, and then you stitch from your edge to your shoulder to exactly that point, and then you backstitch. If you're a bit more experienced, you can do it all in one go, but this method is really good for beginners. So you stitch along your shoulder, you stitch to exactly that point, and then you backstitch, so you lock it, but you don't go past that point. The next thing you need to do on both shoulders, of course. The next thing to do is stitch together your center back line on the collar. So that's quite straightforward. Then I'm going to flip it over to show you a really important trick. So what you need to do is next you need to stitch that, your back neck on your collar, into your back neck on your bodice. And can you see your front isn't as big? The angle is much narrower than your back angle. So what you need to do is snip into here. And this way you need to be very precise, because you just need to snip exactly to that point, but don't touch it. You want to stay, it's about 1 or 2 mil away. But of course, the more you go away, the less nice it's gonna lay. But if you go too close, you got a hole, so don't do that. And once you've cut it open, it's then much easier to flip it around and stitch it together. And then even paper, I can pin it together roughly, and I can show you how it's going to look. So even paper, you can see this is roughly how my shawl collar is going to look once it's done. And once you've done that and you're happy with the fit, you snip into it carefully along the edge to make sure it all sits nicely. And then you can just put on your facing of the outer edge and then understitch it to make it sit nice and flat. And then you've got a finished shawl collar ready to wear. So this was how I chose the design and the fabrics. In the next video I'm going to show you how I drafted and stitched the dress.